The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
We're back to talk about Dave Chappelle. You know, it's Saturday Night Live that chose to bring him on the show this past Saturday and bring him on, and you know, you don't think you're going to light a fire of controversy going on? Remember, he came out to perform. He was brought onto the show to be the guest host, to be in the skits. He did his job, and listen, you got the ratings that you wanted. So if you wanted to get something for Saturday Night Live, when you have a cast that's really been decimated because so many of the veterans have gone on to other projects or just left the show altogether, you got a fresh new cast, and you only got so many people that are left to work the show. So now you have to go ahead and have these guest hosts that can really go ahead and bolster up. And Dave Chappelle is one of those people. So there you go. You got this going on. You bring him out here once again. And I'll tell you, do people actually understand that this is almost like manufactured cancel culture? Like for Dave Chappelle to go ahead and take the gig and come on. I mean, it's one thing when it's this Netflix show. But when Saturday Night Live says, we're going to bring back Dave Chappelle. Well, you already know what's going to happen before. But then, you know, Dave Chappelle is going to do what he does. And he's already kind of in this territory where Dave Chappelle is not going to hold back. He's still one of the few people that have held up strong in cancel culture because he talks about it. He's not afraid of talking about it. Like, I feel like Dave Chappelle is pretty much like the Richard Pryor of this generation. Because seriously, like, you know, when it comes to certain issues, he just doesn't hold back. He's kind of a George Carlin as well. I really feel there's a comparison there. And he's one of the few guys that's still very funny. I mean, people don't think it was funny, but there was a lot of people that were talking about it. And you can see where, again, the comedy community and other people in the community have to go and say something here and just, they have to like stop something from happening. They have to make something go on here. I talk about Dave Chappelle because he's a very good study in someone that I've talked about, something that I've talked about for the last few weeks that I think is still something that needs to be understood. Look, you know, I always talk about the digital disruption, but the truth is that's starting to get a little you're starting to see some of the effects of it. Like just in this last year, when we go to a year in review segment at the end of the year, when we start talking about what happened this year, we're going to have to talk about the fact of how the digital disruption did so much on various levels. We're now social media, where some of the first, that first stage, that stage one of the internet is starting to go ahead and eat itself up. The change of the decade, the change of everything now, because really, digital has made such a difference. We know that the pandemic escalated the disruption. There's that part. And so we're going to talk about that for the end of the year. But then the other thing we want to talk about too is that it is that diminishing of the crossover culture. The things that allow things to cross over. Because Dave Chappelle, you know, he always had his act and what he did. But he crossed over to the mainstream. And he stakes here. I mean, he doesn't get the Chappelle show on Comedy Central if he doesn't do a good job doing all the other stuff that he does and having the relationships that he has. But he did his own work. His stand-up specials and all he was doing, like he performed so well. It's the same idea of how the Kings of Comedy tour came about and how that became a crossover and how Steve Harvey, D.L. Hughley, Bernie Mac, and Cedric the Entertainer all became crossover artists, crossover hits. Remember, Cedric the Entertainer is still working on TV. He had his own show, Cedric. He's on The Neighborhood. Steve Harvey's working Family Feud. He's got books. He's doing a lot of this shit. He's been the most successful of all. D.L. Hughley's still out there. He had his own show. And then he also worked on, you know, he's working on a podcast. He's been always doing other things for other projects. He's never not busy. Also had a radio show, didn't he? And unfortunately, Bernie Mac, he did have his own comedy show, like sitcom, and was doing well. And unfortunately, he passed away. But like the crossover, who would come across and become stars originally from another sector? That kind of thing happens. And that's where Dave Chappelle's been for a long time. But for whatever reason, we continue to see this direction where I feel like he's almost putting himself on the battle line because he needs to be out there. Because he has to continue to keep holding on. Now, it's been almost a year, a little over a year since I actually talked about Dave Chappelle and his special, The Closer. It was a year ago. And then it was like an after effect of that. But you know what? A year later, nothing happened to him. He's been fine. And he's been doing like that all the time. And honestly, he is a social voice of reason. He's a voice of society. Pretty much a voice of reason. He's very grounded with what he's doing. Something about it. And so when he does this here, he holds on. And so now, we got to look at the stories again that have come on here. The more the constant bashing that keeps going on. And I was thinking, can I go into an hour? Sure. But do I really want to go through all these stories about everybody talking about this and then just continue to hear the same thing? No. We've already been through this song and dance before. But it's something we got to talk about. Now, we already know that the new things that are part of this issue where everybody complains about why Dave Chappelle did what he did. Because of what he put into the commentary. He talked about current events, which is almost taboo for comedy these days. But he did it. And then you look at what he said. I mean, people, because of their personal views or because of whatever kind of biases they might have or whatever kind of feelings that they feel like they need to have. Because remember, some people are just, they don't think for themselves. There's there's people that we listen to and we follow. And if they say something like this if they say something about something like this, we're going to listen to them and we're going to believe their opinion as fact. And that's the problem is that these mainstream voices out here, they're supposed to be the arbiters of truth, the arbiters of what is acceptable and what's not. They're the critics, the judges, and we're supposed to believe them? No, because that's changed. Something's happened where you don't just trust everybody out there. I mean, there's people that you have somewhat of trust with and you believe okay, what they're telling me is a voice of reason. It's somebody that is trying to be truthful and kind of telling it like it is without any kind of spin. Like the people that don't have an agenda, the people that don't have anybody to answer to, the people that can do like myself, look, I have nobody to answer to for this when I do this show. I am the editor. I am the recorder. I am the producer and I'm the host. It's all of me. And when I do this show, it's nice to be able to go and have that freedom. And that's what Dave Chappelle has here. He's not under a contract. He's on here for a one-shot deal to do this. He's getting himself out there. I don't even know if he had anything to promote. They just brought him on as a guest. I don't know what he's doing right now, what he's been working on, but he's just off his doing his own thing. Now, The Atlantic was very much a critic about his performance. And he's already hosted Saturday Night Live 3 times since 2016. Always right after an election. And it's because seemingly about producer Lorne Michaels' assumption that only Chappelle has the daring to really get into American political divides live on television. Yeah. If you need somebody to kind of be like that political charge and actually just kind of talk about the current events, he's it. He hasn't been afraid of talking. Lorne Michaels has always known that. I mean, for what it's worth, the guy's been more right than wrong when it comes to doing that show and who should be on there or not. I don't know about the last couple of years, but there was a long time Saturday Night Live just fit out. They could do some political stuff. They could do things like that because other shows did too. So they could do that. They could actually take that topic and go for it. And they did. So Chappelle came out and talked about Kanye West, Kyrie Irving, and the wave of black celebrity anti-Semitism cresting around the country. So there's a whole thing about that part, which I don't want to talk about, but it's not about just one particular. Listen, so you go after Chappelle because of his LGBTQ plus comments during the closer. This time, he's talking about the subjects of certain black celebrities that might be in tune or might be absorbing some content that is anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, right? And so another group of people that might be oppressed, that might be disenfranchised, or that are always constantly criticized, for whatever reason, somebody feels like they need to go ahead and have to defend said group of people because. And that's the problem I don't like either, is that let the community speak for themselves. Why is everybody else being so performative and talking for everybody else? It's as if there are certain organizations that can't talk for themselves. Like for every ethnic, racial quotient that's out there, there's always an organization out there that will speak. Look, when LGBTQ stuff happens, GLAAD is easy out there in the forefront. If it's something for black people, NAACP, Anti-Defamation League, Southern Poverty Law Center, like there's all these different companies that come out, and for whatever political issue it is, like whatever group that's being attacked or oppressed. I mean, comedians have to be criticized. They have to be canceled. They have to be taken away and denied the ability to be comedy, to deliver comedy, to deliver a performance. We have to get rid of that. That's the biggest part we have. I'm not talking about anything when it comes to the particular subjects, the particular groups that are being disenfranchised or oppressed or being pointed out. But everything has something. Black Lives Matter, black people. When it comes to, Time's Up or Me Too, women. When it comes to, there's just various things. Certain things will trigger and cause a problem for various sectors or for some sectors. And there are people that just feel like, well, we need to defend this for whatever. And some people just live to defend other people because they feel like nobody can defend them. I don't need anybody's help. I don't need anybody speaking for me. But that's what they're talking about. So now, Chappelle talks about in his opening monologue on Saturday Night Live. Quote, those words are the and Jews. I've never heard someone do good after they said that. End quote. And then he says about Kanye West's recent meltdown, rapid destruction of his reputation. Okay, yeah. Because Kanye West made comments because he's been upset with a lot of different things going on. And now he's going after the Hollywood establishment, of which he's saying that Hollywood establishment or the celebrity establishment that is controlled and is manipulated and run by a lot of prominent Jewish people in very high positions. And so Dave Chappelle says, a quote, he had broken the show business rules, the rules of perception. If they're black, then it's a gang. If they're Italian, it's a mob. But if they're Jewish, it's a coincidence and you should never speak about it. And then he talks about how, quote, I've been to Hollywood. This is just what I saw. It's a lot of Jews, like a lot. But that doesn't mean anything. There's a lot of black people in Ferguson, Missouri. Doesn't mean they run the place. And then he keeps going and says about Kanye, I can see if you had some kind of issue, you might go out to Hollywood and your mind might start connecting with some kind of dots. And you could maybe adopt the delusion that the Jews run show business. It's not a crazy thing to think, but it's a crazy thing to say out loud at a time like this. And so they're trying to go ahead and attach Dave Chappelle for saying the same kind of comments or being in the same kind of place. But it's something to be said about there are people that are out there that they're not going to defend, but they're going to make the point of, why are we so caught up on this? We get this kind of comments all the time. And you know what? For everybody that thinks that every time something's going to be said that might be racially charged or insensitive, and you think you're going to go and stop it all from happening, listen, you're never going to stop all this from happening. Racism is never going to be taken away. You're never going to stop it. You're never going to completely eliminate it. It's never going to happen. That utopia kumbaya shit, that's not happening. It will not. So you need to realize that's not going to happen to anybody. We're not going to get that. And just realize that we used to deal with this, and there are certain groups and peoples out there that can handle themselves. They can speak for themselves. Let them do that. And then when people are so hypersensitive about what is being said or anything that could come close to relating to an attack, and all of a sudden, somebody has to go and say something here. Somebody has to go and attack here. Somebody has to not just attack, destroy. And that's the part that doesn't need to be said. Now, his notion, according to the Atlantic article, says that the biggest sin Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, was the Brooklyn Nets basketball player who's had a lot of issues, being controversial. For him, it was a matter of that he talked about and tweeted about. It was a book and a documentary. You already know what it is, but that's what he did. I don't know if he actually necessarily said anything where he was supportive of what was being said. It's just it was a different point of view, and he thought it was interesting. And all he did was tweet about it. And they, the press continued to keep going after him to try to make comments, because that's what they do. And so this Atlantic article tries to say that they value stand-up comedians exist to try to reckon with society's most uncomfortable topics. And I'm smart enough to know that a stand-up set is a performance, not a sincere polemic. Chappelle and comics like him are functioning as raging ids on stage, giving humorous voice to dark, sometimes embarrassing topics and thoughts. I have plenty of nits to pick with his forgiving 1-minute summary of Irving's recent revolt after promoting an anti-Semitic film and refusing to apologize about it. Irving was not just slow to apologize, but actively antagonistic when questioned about anti-Semitism. Promoting. He put a tweet out about it. He didn't make any money off of it. There's the thing where if you can make it sound like something, it's going to be it. And that's what they want to do. And then there's attacks on here and whatever. It's like, okay, everybody's got to go ahead and have their issues. But we see what's going on. And so they talk about, in the story, at the end of the story, they talk about Kevin Hart and losing his Oscar hosting gig in 2 separate specials because of the backlash he got for the comments he made to Lil Nas X in person on a show. I mean, everybody just keeps getting attacked. But there's really no rhyme or reason as to what. I mean, the point is that there are certain things that can never be said anymore. And for all of a sudden, so if somebody says something, then we're going to just see this constant attack. Like, we talked about this before, and we said, well, when it comes to cancel culture, you need to ignore it. You just need to go and just get past it. And Dave Chappelle continues to prove the point. But what happens is there are those that are weak, those that are in the same profession as him, and those that are out there that are now at the behest of the betters that are running Hollywood, because they are mainstream media people. Like those that are run by legacy media. Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah. Those comedians that are under control and under the thumb of major media conglomerates. They have to do that. And that's one of the things that happens too. It's like, well, they don't have their own. They can't just go out there and just say what they want. They have to be controlled, and that's what's happening a lot. And it's unfortunate. And so there's all this part that comes up here, and it's like, okay, whatever. It's this constant feeling of like, we need to take this guy out of here. We need to get rid of him. We need to destroy him or her. And it's always like this. Social media has been good for some things, but also has been bad. Because remember, we're not getting people that are actually up front. Like you might start seeing comedians getting attacked. We're seeing that. That has happened many times now. But everything else is like, okay. And there are just some people that want to stay out of this and not be involved. Jerry Seinfeld actually gave comments about Dave Chappelle's commentary, his monologue. And Jerry Seinfeld was out doing promotion for a new book, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee book. 10th anniversary of his road trip talk show, which is done very well. And there's a question that is asked within a Q&A by a Hollywood Reporter to Jerry Seinfeld. And Seth Abramovich actually got the question out there to him. So here's what we got so far. Let's get into the part where what he asks. So Abramovich asks, I was just watching Jon Stewart and Colbert, two of my favorite comedians, debate the Dave Chappelle SNL monologue. I'm just curious where you fall on it. Do you find it funny? And all he said was this. I did think the comedy was well executed, but I think the subject matter calls for a conversation that I don't think I'd want to have in this venue. Perfect answer. Ambassadorial. Good job, Jerry. Then there's a follow-up by Seth, quote, but it made you uncomfortable. And then he says, it provokes a conversation, which hopefully is productive. He doesn't want to answer the question. Stop it, Seth. And then he goes on and says, it's the kind of conversation you would have with Dave because you seem to have a close relationship with him. And then he says, I don't have a close relationship with him. We're friends, and it's not a close relationship. So Seth Abramovich tried 3 times to get Jerry Seinfeld on the record. He wanted to get him to say something about Dave. Bullying, basically. You might not think so, but you know what? That's what the media does. They are supposed to get this out of him. So like they ask, by the way, this is asked towards the end of the interview because I'm looking at the interview itself and he's asking about all this about the book, asking about, transition with audiences, the rise of social media, regular discourse, the Pop-Tart joke, comedy as a science. And then he goes on and talks about Dave Chappelle. Found a way to talk about it. And then they go along with the rest of the interview. But there was a plan to do that. It was strategic. And Jerry Seinfeld did not take the bait. He didn't say anything. And even the media will try to say, well, by the fact he didn't say anything means he said something. You can't win. You're not going to win. And that's the whole point. Why even try? Why even let all this go on? And then there's also a star of the show Hacks, Hannah Einbender, who also talked about this, but I bring her up because she actually brought up something poignant. So she makes up in the monologue, establishment bullies reinforcing status quo is not the job of a comedian. The fact is, non-Jews aren't as keenly aware of anti-Semitic ideas, tropes, verbiage. Most people just miss these ideas altogether and only remember that they laughed. So when Jews say, hey, there was anti-Semitism in there, folks go, you're too sensitive. Learn to take a joke. Because no one wants to feel they're bad people. They gaslight Jews by telling us we're not imagining things. That we are imagining things. The danger here is that Dave Chappelle and every other male comedian who believes that their amplification of bigotry is just freedom of speech. Well, you see where she's already going here. Are seen as tellers of hard truths, and thus anyone who criticizes them are seen as snowflakes. I invite you to reframe the narrative. Those men who pick on marginalized groups are establishment bullies, reinforcing the status quo, not at all the job of a comedian. It's the people who speak out against them who are the truth tellers. Okay. I don't get that part. I don't get what they're trying to say. But that's what she put out there on Instagram, making a point. Now, Jon Stewart, as we already heard about with Stephen Colbert, they were talking, and Jon Stewart talked about it and said, quote, I don't believe censorship and penalties are the way to end anti-Semitism. So we're going to have the conversation about it. Being brought up. I mean, we know there's going to be some people out there that are going to be talking about this and saying, what's going on here? Because now it's like, why is this becoming such a thing again? Let's dig in deeper, right? It's just not on the surface. And that's the part some people are worried about as well. And then there's more to be said about the overall point of comedy anyway, because when you look at the Grammys this year, 2 of the artists that are going to be nominated for Grammy Awards are Dave Chappelle and Louis C.K. And the Grammys CEO, Harvey Mason Jr., had to go ahead and confront questions about this. He says it's his job to, quote, evaluate the quality of the art and not to control who the voters vote for. And so the nominees for the 65th Annual Grammy Awards were held in Los Angeles. Chappelle is now back up for Best Comedy Album for The Closer. Louis C.K. nominated in the same category for his latest album, Sorry. And so the Hollywood Reporter caught up with Harvey Mason. He points out the nominees chosen don't reflect the personal opinions of the people in the organization. But Mason also suggests that the power is with the voters when it comes to who's nominated. So regardless of personal feelings, he doesn't feel that it would be fair to remove anyone that had been chosen. Right. The people still speak. But the problem is there are people that think, well, they're not going to let the audience determine what's wrong with this. They're just going to say, no, it's just anti-Semitic and you shouldn't do it. We're going to lecture you. We're going to say you don't need to be doing this. And we don't want anybody that can let this all out to happen. Right? That's that part. Whistleblower. Like, it's like, hall monitors. They got to have that. And the thing, too, is that Grammy Awards come up February 5th, 2023. And there's the point here in the story from Movie Web that I'm taking from is that Chappelle and C.K., Louis C.K. are still performing despite their past controversies. And Chappelle, besides doing SNL for a season high rating, he's still touring with a stand-up comedy. Louis C.K. is back into acting, premiering in the latest film 4th of July earlier this year. He's also touring, in and out of the United States. And whatever happened there, he made it through. And this continues to be the point that everybody's all upset about. Another story coming across that's different, where from the black perspective, an NPR writer who is black, Eric Diggins, talked about that he critiqued Dave Chappelle and his fans about questioning his blackness. So he said he was disappointed by Dave Chappelle's performance. And that he decided then he was going to write a column criticizing Chappelle's recent monologue, part of a punishing delusional responses on social media aimed at attacking me as a black man. And there were some that were all talking on here on social media. They were calling him a traitor to my race, a biscuit-eating sellout, a coonish Uncle Tom / Sambo who allowed his Jewish paymasters to dictate his writing. We're starting to hear that a lot, too. And he writes on and says that, quote, it's difficult to tell which of these accounts might be bots or malicious hackers, more interested in sowing a division and hate than any logical argument. But some of the arguments raised in these spaces and nevertheless echo justifications and defenses I've seen delivered by actual people. He goes on to say that he's a comedian, not a journalist. But those of us who have been doing this a while know that humor rooted in unfair and inaccurate stereotypes can become ideas that the people are the subject of those prejudices have to live with for a very long time. And so the fact that he actually had people that were criticizing him to even bring the story up, he had an issue. Well, and now they continue. There's more to it, but I'll just leave that there. I also want to hear what Bill Maher actually says about it, because we'll probably hear something from him that will also give us a perspective. Like to hear Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, I mean, Bill Maher has more or less been a little more reasonable, and I'm sure if he has a chance to talk about all this, he's going to be on the side that I think that, he wants the same kind of freedoms to do the comedy that he wants to do, just like anybody else should be able to do. Because he doesn't want to have his acts censored or content that's not allowed to be done. I would agree with that. One other story I'm going to take, because I think just holding on to this, there's more stories I can bring up, but I'm going to wait and hold them till next week, because you know what? Next week and Thanksgiving is going to be dead. So I need to hold something over for Thanksgiving night. So I'm going to do this. Next week, we'll talk about a few things where TikTok has Gen Z hooked. That streaming killed the one-hit wonder. Sped up songs are taking over TikTok and driving up the charts. So we'll talk about all that coming up next week. We're going to leave it there, but I got one more story to go and wrap things up before we go ahead and move along to wrap the show up in a little about 30 minutes. We'll leave it like that tonight. National Review. For whatever you think, that was the only place I could find a story that talked about the overall picture of comedy. And they said on the story, let comedy be comedy. They point out the ADL going after Chappelle's statements. And Jonathan Greenblatt, their CEO, says that, quote, we shouldn't expect Dave Chappelle to serve as society's moral compass, but disturbing to see SNL not just normalize, but popularize anti-Semitism. Why are Jewish sensitivities denied or diminished at almost every turn? Why does our trauma trigger applause? So there's that part. And then the writer here for National Review says, are you kidding me? So everything that insinuates anything about a social identity group is out of bounds? Chappelle's comments were undoubtedly distasteful and crude, but that's what comedy is supposed to be. The difference between Kanye's malicious invective and Chappelle's stand-up routine is that it was a stand-up routine. If you can't lampoon stereotypes, comedy is dead. Yeah. We would have this kind of complaints and things like this before. And, you know, if there was an apology, there might be one. But you know what? Apologies don't work anymore. We've talked about that for years on this program. You can't just go and apologize now and expect you're going to have everything be status quo. It's not. It's not. If you're going to go down on that hill, you're going to die on that hill, and you're going to go for it because it's like, hey, I'm not going to censor myself. I'm not going to hold back on what I'm doing because comedy is allowed to be blue. It's allowed to stretch boundaries. That's what's being done. So there you go. But that's where we are. And it's unfortunate that we continue to see this going on. But like I said, I don't want to go along about this. Why am I going to go and continue to just have to explain things? This is a 30-minute show. We don't need to go more into detail about this because it's not worth it. And so I'm going to leave it there. Not much else to bring up. I'll probably go see The Menu in the movie theater this weekend. Hopefully I'll get a chance to catch it. I'm a little worried because it's a horror/comedy, so I'm wondering how much horror there's going to be, but we'll find out. But that's the show. Thanks for listening in. Let me know if you like the 30-minute format. If you do, but sometimes I think I definitely want to keep the hour-long format because it works. Like I could go hour-long, but you know what? This is right here. It's just enough. This is what people want to hear. And I don't need to go much more further into it. So we'll just leave it there. Thanks for listening to another Broadcasters podcast. Come back next week. And remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.